Today we will be learning about remote sensing and GIS applications in forestry and ecology. So if we start our thing, we first have to understand what our environment consists of. It consists of the natural areas, as you can see, as well as the disturbed or polluted areas, the pristine environment and the man-made environment. And we are also degrading our environment by way of cutting the forest, pollutions, and unsustainable agriculture. So in effect, the unique and wonderful environment of ours is also fragile, and we are also exploiting and neglecting it. And due to this, our environment is really changing. The challenges which we are facing are water scarcity. As you can see, in 2025, our region will have acute scarcity of the water. We are also using energy, mostly the unsustainable fossil fuel based energy, for our daily energy requirement. Most of our global forests are degraded. You can see only few of the intact forests are there, mostly in the Canada, Russia, some part of Latin America and Central Africa. Most of the regions which have high human population, we have almost negligible intact contiguous forests. And this environment is changing because of our own greed as well as unsustainable resource utilization. So, in a nutshell, the environmental degradation is driven by the dynamics of increasing population, resource consumption, development, globalization, in some way our social structures and technology. And it is basically threatening our climate, our natural resources like biodiversity, the stability and security of our society as well as environment. And all these also play a role in degrading our health. And this may affect our future scenarios as well as future generation. So coming back to Indian forests have a very high amount of significance for our society. Like it provides valuable ecosystem goods and services which sustain a major chunk of our population. Since India has one of almost 3 of the global biodiversity hotspots, so the biodiversity in the Indian forest is quite unique, and it has the potential to sustain the various ecological services as well as functions. And since these forests are also supporting a huge population, so these forests are basically fragmented. And there are innumerable biotic and abiotic factors which are basically influencing the structure and functioning of these ecosystems. But we have to manage it, and we have to manage it in a holistic manner. For this, we need high-end technological assistance to do it. And further, we also have to sustain our forest resources for our future generation, as well as to cater to our daily requirements of timber and non-timber forest products. And to manage this sustainably, we need technological intervention. So, how do we use the space-based technology for managing our forest resources? At the top, we have the multi-sensor remote sensor, which basically gives you a synaptic coverage of the region or the resources. And these remote sensing inputs gives us the greenness, ground closure, information on vegetation types, and in some cases, the species assemblage or the gregarious formation. These information derived from the remote sensing sensors associated with information on climate, topography, socioeconomics from the various sources like weather stations, surveys, digital elevation models, and sensors, along with information on water, soil, and geology, and ground-based information like volume, biomass, wildlife, and species diversity. All these information, when we put in GIS domain and we subject it to multi-thematics modeling using various approaches like multi-criteria, rule-based, empirical, or mechanistic modeling, gives us the information or the information for taking decision basically for forest cover monitoring, forest type mapping, growing stock assessment, carbon sequestration, identification of the potential protected areas, and also take informed decision on formulating the forest protection or preventing forest degradation. So what are the capabilities of remote sensing in plant resource assessment? We have a range of sensor suites, right from the spatial to temporal as well as spectral. If we take the spatial, we have various sizes of pixels. Like we have force pixels, which is from 60 meters to 500 meters. Using these pixels, we can see the biogeochemical interactions, basically at a global or regional level, like ecosystem processes. Then we have moderate resolution satellite sensors, some things in the range of 30 meters. For example, the Landsat TM or IRS list 3. These can be used for identification of the habitat, conditions, or health. Also this is the scale which you can study is the forest type. Then you have a high resolution satellite data, which ranges from 1 meter to 5 meter, which can help us in studying the habitat fringe or habitat structure. And it can also help us in delineating the various community boundaries of the forest types. And this sort of data set is used to study the communities. We have other set of sensors like lizard bone sensors, which can give us a fine scale structure of the plant canopy, like what are the stories and how the different stories are distributed in the vertical domain. And this also helps us in creating an automated 3D visual model of the particular forest canopy. We also have hyperspectral. This is a satellite which has more than 220 bands. Each band has a difference of around 10 nanometers, which can help us in studying the species, which with help of this we can discriminate the species. This can also help in identifying the variations in the plant biochemistry, mainly nitrogen, lignin, and to some extent it can identify the system nutrient status. and this can be used for within community studies. So all in all, the remote sensing sensor suites gives us a whole realm of access to the information in the plant community from a distance. Just an example of how the multi-resolution satellite data set in spatial domain looks like. We have selected a part of Western Ghats, wherein this is the AWaves data, which is a 56-meter resolution data. The same region in list 3, you can see the amount of details are much higher. When this region is seen in a quick bird, you can identify the various density classes as well as the type classes. When you zoom this, you can even identify the various plant canopies. So, if we summarize it, how does the remote sensing and GIS can be used for assessment of plant resources? First and foremost, this can be used for data retrieval, which gives us an idea about the availability, site features, traits, and generations. Then we can have information on data analysis, like field gene bank, site selection, monitoring, clients, fragmentation of habitats, and what sort of explorations can be planned. We have information on spatial modeling. These information in GIS domain can be used with various modeling approaches to give the prediction or projection for various ecological functions. And then we have the process models, wherein we can model the habitat resilience, hydrology, nutrient dynamics, and impact of climate. We will be discussing most of this in the subsequent slides with some of the case studies. So, how do we do it and why do we do it? We need to have a common vision of the earth, and whatever abstraction we make of the earth should be more and more realistic. So what we essentially need is a better way to represent, understand, manage, and communicate with each other of world as a system. And this can help us to evolve a system for measurement, monitoring, modeling, planning, decision making, and management for sustainable evolution of our Earth. And for this, geoinformatics provides the framework. What does geoinformatics basically do? From remote sensing, it gives us the patterns of the distribution of the various land use, land cover, patterns in the distribution of the various geomorphological regimes, and the patterns in distribution of the resources. All these are basically translated into models, which are basically maps. And once you have the maps, they are nothing but the information in spatial domain. These maps, when you have the entire information in one spatial domain, you can do the various process modeling. So basically, geoinformatics can be used for studying the earth process systems. Is a macroscope representation of the earth system. So if we come to the case studies of forestry and ecology, applications using remote sensing and GIS. This was one of the first applications of forestry, and wherein using remote sensing, the forest cover of India was mapped. This was first done in 1980s using 1972 and 1981 data sets. This was done in, this method was developed at NRSA and then subsequently transferred to Forest Survey of India to carry out the biennial vegetation cover mapping. Then spatial technology can also be used for mapping the life zones. I think all of you have at some point of time studied about the Holdridge life zones, wherein you have the various aspects of precipitation, temperature and elevation. So using a temperature map, precipitation map, potential evapotranspiration map and digital elevation model, the life zones can be classified. So based on this life zone classification, a biome level characterization of the Indian vegetation was carried out in 2000, 1998 and 2000 to identify the various biomes in India. And around 27 biomes were classified based on the evapotranspiration, temperature regimes, precipitation, and the satellite data for the land use, land cover. This approach was also used to characterize the biodiversity. There had been a previous lecture on biodiversity characterization at landscape level, so I'll not dwell much on that. But I'll just give a brief glimpse of why it was done. See, there has been a concept that biodiversity per se cannot be documented for the entire globe, because we will be losing the species faster than we can document them. So for a conservation and prioritization, we need to identify the regions which have high biological richness. And best way to do it is to characterize the biodiversity so that most of the functional and structural attributes of the biodiversity can be taken into consideration to identify the biologically rich areas. The approach which was followed was a top-down approach, wherein we had identified the land use vegetation types from the top, and a bottom-up approach. Once we have identified or stratified the vegetation types, we do a stratified random sampling of those areas to get the phytosociological information of the region. So two-season IRS list 3 data was used using hybrid classification. We had around 16,518 field points consisting of 7,600 odd species data, and all these were integrated in a geospatial model to give the biological richness map of India. The main highlights which we could identify from this project were that there was a high fragmentation in Western Himalayas and Western Ghats. The Northeast India has relatively less fragmentation and disturbance regimes. There was high biological richness in Northeast India as well as Western Ghats, and of course some parts of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And this entire data set is disseminated through a web-based application known as Biodiversity Information System, which has the capability of interacting, querying for the region-specific conservation planning. We also have given facilities for overlaying of the spatial product with the administrative boundaries and base details which the user can themselves upload. And we have also given, based on the field data, we have also given access to ecological categorization like rare, endangered species in a given region. And all these are in a central repository known as Biodiversity Information System. Apart from this, one of the extensive use of remote sensing is for the canopy density estimation. This slide shows a digital photo image segmentation from the field. This is the 90% as estimated through ocular estimation of forest cover. This is the 70% canopy cover, this is 60% canopy cover, and this is the 50%. These images, when they were subjected to digital photo image segmentation in the lab, they were more or less matching. So using this principle, the forest type and density stratification had been formulated using satellite imagery. The images are mostly high resolution panchromatic images or a combination of moderate resolution image with thermal bands. So the forest cover or the canopy cover reference basically is the percentage of forest area within a particular forest and is represented by this, like this A is basically more than 80%. So this entire pixels you see, only 3 pixels are in non-forest classes, while this is something like 80 to 60%, this is 40 to 60%, this is 40 to 20%, and this is less than 20%, which can be classified as dense forest, continuous forest, fragmentous forest, forest mosaic, or non-forest. There is also a mapping technique or a model which has been developed using the thermal band of the thematic mapper, Landsat thematic mapper satellite image. And in this also, using this thermal image as well as the other multispectral image like NIR, near infrared, red and green, we can identify the various density classes up to 5 classes, that is less than 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80 and more than 80. This technique is known as FCD stratification or forest canopy density stratification through object-oriented image analysis. Now we come to the realms of GIS-based modeling. There are different types of modeling. Some are simple statistical models, some are dynamic models, some are driver-based models. What I am showing here is a representation of a driver-based model developed by ISRO. In this, we use the land use land cover, temporal land use land cover map, as well as the temporal driver maps. Drivers like population density, density of the infrastructure, road network and their increase, changes in the climatic regimes and the topographical range. Based on these drivers, we generate the land use land cover map for the future. Basically, we are using the T1, that is the past data and present data, to generate the land use land cover for the future. So we had used 2005 data. This is actual data and this is the predicted data using 1985 and 1995 data. And you can see the accuracy is quite good for most of the classes. And wherever the accuracy is not there are because of the various policy decisions, like mining in this case, in this region. GIS is also used to study impact of climate change on the various ecological and forest based indices. Like here we see the spatial distribution of the net primary productivity from 1982 to 1999. And you can see that in these regions, especially in these regions, the net primary productivity has increased by around 1.5 to 1%. Whereas in these regions, this has decreased. And these decrease are mostly due to the land use land cover conversions. The conversion of forest land to agriculture or agriculture to desertification. Now we come to another application of remote sensing and GIS to identify the niche of a particular species and how this modeling technique can be used to assess the impact of climate change on the species distribution. So basically what the niche model does is that it uses the location points of the occurrence of a particular species, and it has the spatial information of the environmental variables. Environmental variables like climatic regimes, like topographical regimes, like land use land cover, etc. So once you have this information, you use the various optimization techniques in niche models like genetic algorithm, artificial neural network, or even maximum entropy based models to identify the potential distribution of a particular species. A part of this data set is used to train the model, and a part that is randomly selected are used for testing the model. And once we have a good estimate, a good test of the model, this model is then used with the IPCC scenarios or the future climate scenarios to project for the future species range. So these are the general climatic variables which are used for species niche models, like annual mean temperature, mean diurnal range, isothermality, a total of 19 temperature regimes as well as the precipitation regimes have been used. As well as the information on elevation, aspect, soil, slope, and land use land cover. All these in GIS domain has been used to identify the changes in the spatial ranges of this particular species, Agapetis serpens, which is basically a medicinal plant found in the Darjeeling Himalayas, and how this species in different climatic regimes or climate change scenarios vary. This is the present, this is the 1977, this is the present, this is 2050, and this is 2080. And what we observed was that the species range is shifting from the subtropical broadleaf to temperate broadleaf in the probability 9.21%. The range, although is relatively constant during 1977 to 2000, is projected to increase significantly in 2050. Like you see, which was mostly in this temperate, I would say, subtropical and temperate region, is shifting to the temperate coniferous. The broadleaf region is shifting to the temperate coniferous. Now, this remote sensing and GIS is also used extensively to monitor the impacts of degradation on our environment. Like you can see these two images. This is a false color composite of part of Odisha in 1973 and the same region in 2004. You can see the extent of degradation due to clear felling and encroachment in this area. This is an example of shifting cultivation in the northeastern states. The small holes which you see in the contiguous forest covers are basically the shifting cultivation which is practiced in these regions. And there is also the impact of forest fire. So let us see how a forest remote sensing picks up the forest degradation. This is an example from Amazon. In 1970, there were a few villages in this place. During the next 3 years, a road was built to connect these villages. The moment the road was built, the logging started. in a fishbone manner. And by 1996, this entire region, which was once pristine evergreen forest, rainforest, was reduced to small patches of forest and non-forest mosaic. This is an example how remote sensing is used extensively for forest fire management. This is a MODIS Terra image of resolution 1 kilometer of 14th March 2005. So using this image, a thermal anomaly was detected in this region. At the same time, RS GIS data was acquired and the burnt area in this region could extensively be mapped. And these are the regions where you have the active fire locations. So using a suite of sensors of different resolutions, remote sensing can be extensively used for combating degradation due to forest fires. We have also a number of studies of use of remote sensing in GIS for identifying the potential wildlife habitat. This is an example of identification of swamp deer potential habitat in Jhilmil Jheel Conservation Reserve in Uttarakhand. This has been done using a multi-criteria based analysis. So what we have done is that we have taken the satellite data. From this, a vegetation type and land cover map was prepared. Using various other information like distance from the road, distance from the water body, preference foraging areas, and other ancillary information. Using a multi-criteria based approach, the potential habitat map of the swamp deer was mapped. So it was observed that only around 5.44% of the area of the conservation reserve was found to be highly suitable habitat for the swamp deer. And apart from the conservation reserve, another around 2.57 kilometers outside the conservation reserve was also highly suitable. So this information can be used very well to modify or identify the revised boundaries of the various conservation reserves. GIS is also used for modeling the ecosystem networks and wildlife corridors. There are many approaches for this. There are various mathematical approaches used for network analysis like graph theory, circuit theory, or least cost path can be used. So this is an example wherein we had used a graph theory to identify the potential links for movement of an invasive species, that is the maling bamboo, from Senchal Wildlife Reserve to the other areas of Darjeeling Himalayas. So when it was subjected to a graph theoretical based identification of the nodes, we could identify these 3 critical nodes which are playing a major role in transfer of the propagule of this particular invasive species. And when this could be identified, we can very well block the access of these particular nodes, or if we do a treatment of these particular nodes, the invasion of these particular invasive species can be checked. Similarly, we have used a least cost path analysis to identify the potential elephant corridor between Periyar Tiger Reserve and Chinnar Wildlife Sanctuary in northern Kerala. Actually, this region is a mosaic of forest, shola forests, and plantations, with some habitations in this region. And due to this habitation, there has been extensive human-elephant conflicts. So using various GIS-based techniques and modeling the elephant preference and elephant impedance layers, we could identify the potential elephant corridor. And when this corridor was overlaid with actual sighting of the elephants, you can see it very well matches it. So these sort of approaches can be used to model the species migration, regions of local species extinction, ecosystem energy and nutrient flows, as well as ecosystem losses. Apart from this, we have the emerging remote sensing tools like high resolution images. So using this high resolution image, part of Dehradun, we could delineate the avenue trees. We can also delineate the various forest classes or gregarious formations in space. Like this is the FRI campus which you see here. In this we have a number of various gregarious patches, like this is a pine patch, this one. This is basically the teak patch, this one. Here we have a sal patch, a terminalia patch and a bamboo patch. So all these can be delineated using high resolution multispectral satellite data. Apart from high resolution satellite data, multispectral satellite data, we also have a synthetic aperture radar based data sets. Using this, we can very well identify the biomass of a particular forest type, because the synthetic aperture radar basically gives the volume backscatter. So when the incident radiation strikes an object, it basically is scattered, and the level of scattering is dependent on the volume and number of multiple scattering or multiple scattering which is taking place. Then you also have you can also use the LIDAR based data for reconstructing a 3D field view of a particular forest patch. And this helps in accurate estimation of the biomass of a particular region. Apart from that, we have hyperspectral data sets, which has basically for a particular object the spectral reflectance of around 220 to 224 bands between 0.4 and 2.5 micrometer with a bandwidth of around 10 nanometer. So this can give you information of the biochemistry, the information of the soil nutrient status, as well as the various plant structural component like lignin, cellulose, etc. So to summarize, all this information can be used for various applications. For example, I have taken conservation of critical ecosystem using space-based information. So you have information on the vegetation types, you have information on the field, you have information on the fragmentation, information on the connectivity, and information on the biological richness. Based on these, we can identify the areas which are the biological hotspots right from the global level to regional level. And once you have information like this, you can identify the regions which basically need conservation. So these approaches can be used for conservation of the biodiversity, designing of ecological and wildlife corridors, sustainable bioprospecting, baseline database for ecological studies, and many more. Apart from this, we can also study how the climate change is playing a role in ecosystem structure and function. For example, using the various modeling approach, we can model the tree line shift, or using a time series data set such as the Moody's NDVI, we can identify the various changes in the phenology, the flowering, fruiting, how the various nutrient cyclings are playing a role. And once this is coupled with field-based information, such as long-term ecological research stations, we can have information at all the levels, and we can study our ecosystems in terms of phenology, productivity, decomposition, nutrient cycling, biomass, invasive species, fire proneness, all as a result, or what is the influence of climate change on these parameters. And this information can be scalable, this information can be multidimensional and amenable to models. So, what we have? We have data, which is basically at the bottom of the model. When you add context to this data, it becomes information. Once we can understand the information, it becomes knowledge. And at the top is when knowledge has a significance, it is with wisdom. Thank you for your patience.